Scott and his girlfriend Madison arrive by car at Stu Macher's house in Woodsboro, as the place is rented out as a themed Airbnb, so Scott takes the opportunity to take pictures because he's a horror movie fan. Madison gets bored and decides to go to the bathroom. Upon leaving, she realizes Scott is nowhere to be found. She starts looking for him in the rooms, and suddenly a Ghostface scares her, but Scott appears and shows her it's just a motion sensor animatronic doll. Later, the house phone rings. Scott answers because it's part of the location's experience, and a voice asks him several horror movie trivia questions until he gets one wrong and hangs up. Scott returns to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Madison gets a call on her cell phone from a voice warning her she's going to die that very night. She assumes it's a prank part of the game, but gets mad when the voice starts insulting her, so she hangs up and goes looking for her boyfriend to complain. Upon entering another room, the animatronic moves differently. Madison approaches to check the sensor and punches the mask. Then, when turning around, she bumps into Ghostface, hits him, and discovers it's Scott. Then Scott steps closer and notices the doll is acting weird. He goes to check it, and the killer reveals he is real, lunging at Scott to stab him repeatedly in the head until he dies. Madison throws an object at the attacker and runs away, but Ghostface chases her through the house, grabs her by the hair, and throws her down the stairs. She tries to crawl away to escape. He grabs her leg and slams her head against the railing. Although she manages to break free, runs upstairs, and rips a lamp off the wall to defend herself. In the struggle, Madison kicks the wall, and they both fall over the railing. She hangs from the lamp for a moment, but ends up slipping and falls directly onto Ghostface's knife, getting stabbed in the stomach. The killer sprays gasoline all over the house, pours some on Madison, and sets the whole place on fire before walking away. Meanwhile, Tatum, Sidney Prescott's daughter, is in her room in the town of Pinerove when her boyfriend Ben comes through the window to visit her secretly. Tatum's mother enters the room, immediately discovers Ben, and kicks him out of the house. Tatum calls Sidney out for being so overprotective, labeling her a hypocrite because she knows that in the past, her mother's boyfriends also came through the window. Then Sidney goes to her room to talk to her husband Mark about how hard it is to raise a teenager. The next day, Tatum grabs one of her mother's old jackets to go to school. Sidney doesn't like the idea because it brings back bad memories, but finally gives in and lets her take it. Tatum goes to school with her friends Hannah and Chloe, while Sidney heads to work at her coffee shop where she runs into her neighbor Jessica and her son Lucas. At the shop, there's a customer named Carl who stares at Sidney in a weird way. Then Sidney goes to her office and gets a call on her cell phone from a voice claiming to be Ghostface. She assumes it's a prank call, but the attacker starts a video call, and Sidney freezes when she sees Stu Macher's deformed face on the screen. The man proves it's not a game by mentioning her daughter's name and turning the camera to show he's standing right outside the school theater. Sidney speeds off in her car toward the school while calling Mark on the phone to ask for help. At that moment, Tatum is rehearsing a play with her classmates, but the teacher scolds her for acting timidly and asks her to try harder. Afterward, everyone takes a break and leaves Hannah alone on the stage practicing a scene with a harness operated by Aaron. Suddenly, the theater lights go out, Aaron disappears in the dark, and the harness mechanism goes crazy, tossing Hannah back and forth through the air. Ghostface emerges from the shadows, watches Hannah swing, and stabs her every time she passes near him, until he finally raises the knife so she falls onto the blade, completely slicing her stomach open. Sidney runs into the theater, discovers the killer, and shoots at him, but misses and he quickly escapes. Then Sidney finds her daughter, hugs her to keep her from seeing the dead bodies, and takes her straight home to pack their things. Upon arriving home, they realize someone cut the power. Ghostface comes down from the attic and corners Tatum. Then Mark appears, drops his gun, and tries to tackle the killer. Both men fight all over the house. Mark gets stabbed in the arm, and finally, Ghostface pushes him down the stairs, knocking him unconscious. Sidney grabs a baseball bat, hits Ghostface, and runs with her daughter into a panic room hidden behind a shoe rack, closing the heavy steel door just in time. Since the killer can't open the door, Sidney and Tatum use a secret passageway inside the walls to try to get out of the house. But Ghostface hears them moving and starts stabbing his knife through the wall to try and hurt them. Sidney uses a pipe to hit the knife from inside the wall and manages to bend it, buying time to get out of the house with her daughter, while Ghostface realizes Mark's body is no longer on the stairs. Going out into the street, Mark surprises the killer from behind, takes him down, and they resume the fight in the front yard. Sidney smashes a birdhouse over Ghostface's back, and Mark pushes him into the main street. At that exact moment, a speeding truck drives by and runs over Ghostface, killing him instantly, and out of the vehicle steps journalist Gale Weathers along with Chad and Mindy, who also survived previous massacres. Everyone approaches the body, takes off the mask, and discovers the attacker was Carl, the man from the coffee shop, who turns out to be a patient that had recently escaped from a psychiatric hospital. The police cordon off the area, everyone goes back inside the house, and Sidney receives a new phone call from Stu Macher, who mocks them and warns them the game isn't over. Sidney understands there are always two killers involved, so she decides to leave her family under police protection and goes with Gale to the psychiatric hospital where Carl escaped from to look for clues. There, they talk to the supervisor named Marco, show him Stu Macher's picture, and he confirms that an identical man was institutionalized at the hospital for years due to amnesia issues. But he was discharged a couple of weeks ago and was Carl's best friend. To try to trace the killer's calls, Sidney agrees to give Gale a live interview on her TV show, using herself as bait. At night, a curfew is imposed in the town, so Tatum convinces the twins Mindy and Chad to go hide at Chloe's parents' bar, along with Ben and Lucas, to try to figure out who the second killer is. While the teens argue in the bar and accuse each other, they watch Sidney's interview on TV. Gale starts pressing Sidney with highly invasive questions about her daughter's trauma, which makes Sidney angry, causing her to leave the set and cut the broadcast abruptly. Just seconds later, Sidney gets a video call from Stu, who shows her on the screen that he is standing right outside the bar where Tatum is. Sidney panics, runs to her car, and notifies the police. At the same time at her house, Mark hears strange noises in the garage, which is being remodeled, goes to investigate among the scattered tools, and a new Ghostface wraps him in protective plastic and then stabs him repeatedly. While all that is happening at the house, Tatum feels very worried about her mother's well-being and asks her boyfriend Ben to drive her in his car to meet up with her. Once both get into the vehicle, Tatum decides to open Ben's laptop and discovers something disturbing, as he has a program open where he has been using deepfake technology to overlay Stu Macher's face onto his own. Ben tries to make excuses, arguing that he was just testing the software to analyze the videos, but Tatum completely distrusts him, hits him hard using the laptop itself, and runs out of the car in a rush. Stepping onto the street, the young woman realizes Ghostface is already waiting for her outside, so she turns around and starts running all over the neighborhood begging for help, realizing the local shops are closed and no one answers her. At the same time, inside the bar, Chad and Mindy notice the front door is locked and they can't get out. And suddenly they start hearing strange noises coming from the kitchen. Inside that area is Chloe throwing away a burnt pizza, and suddenly the lights go out and Ghostface attacks her by surprise. But she manages to struggle with the killer by grabbing a kitchen mallet, though he slams her against the cabinets. During the chaos, a knife falls to the floor. Chloe quickly picks it up, and upon hearing someone approaching from behind, she launches an instinctive attack, accidentally stabbing Chad. Ghostface appears right behind, retrieves the knife, drops Chad, and then slices a deep cut into Mindy's stomach, leaving the two siblings lying on the floor bleeding out. Chloe runs toward the seating area to hide behind the bar counter, while Lucas enters the kitchen trying to help despite Chloe's warnings, but gets stabbed and thrown to the floor bleeding. Ghostface finds Chloe, slams her head against the bar, and pushes her into a pile of broken glasses that end up cutting her throat, to later drag Lucas and brutally impale him on a beer tap, making him spit alcohol mixed with blood until he dies. Meanwhile, Tatum keeps running desperately through the streets and hides behind a florist's kiosk, running into Ben again, who swears to her he isn't the killer and would never hurt her. She apologizes, believing his words, but the conversation is abruptly cut short when Ghostface appears from behind and stabs Ben multiple times until he kills him, prompting a furious Tatum to shove the killer against a store window to buy time and keep fleeing. Tatum manages to reach her mother's coffee shop, uses the security passcode to lock the front door, and hides, receiving a call from Sidney, who uses the shop's security cameras to guide and protect her from the movements of the killer who is already trying to break in. Sidney gives her the code to a safe located in the office, teaches her how to take the safety off the gun, and gives her a short motivational speech about survival, ordering her to shoot through the wall as soon as Ghostface walks away from the door. Tatum follows the order. The bullets go through the wall and manage to knock down the masked man, but when she tries to finish him off, Ghostface quickly gets up and they both fight for the gun. Tatum grabs a fire extinguisher and hits the killer hard on the head, uses a couple of chairs to beat him, and manages to knock him down onto a table. But turning toward the exit door, she discovers that a second Ghostface has just arrived, cornering her with no way out. Shortly after, Sidney finally arrives at the coffee shop speeding and finds the place empty with only the gun lying on the floor. At that moment, the killer calls her on the phone and warns her that he won't kill her daughter until Sidney arrives at her house completely alone. So she heads over there and notices that all the screens and devices in the house turn on, playing videos. The recordings show Stu Macher's face morphing into the faces of other killers from the past, mocking her and blaming her for the fact that everyone who gets close to her ends up 6 feet under. Sidney starts screaming, demanding to know Tatum's whereabouts, and a voice tells her to head to the backyard, where she finds her daughter tied to a chair in front of the first killer. The masked man takes off his costume, revealing himself to be Marco, the IT security expert from the psychiatric hospital, who admits to having laughed at everyone by using artificial intelligence to digitally revive Stu. Marco drags Mark's badly injured body to show that he's still alive, and at that moment, the second Ghostface unmasks themselves, revealing it to be Jessica, the neighbor and mother of the recently deceased Lucas. Jessica confesses her motives with extreme calmness, detailing that years ago Sidney's biographical book inspired her to murder her abusive husband, but that she was terribly disappointed in her hero when Sidney chose to hide during the recent attacks in New York. With a completely disturbed mind, Jessica accuses Sidney of being old and preferring to run away instead of fighting, explaining that her plan is to murder Sidney right in front of Tatum's eyes to teach her the true meaning of trauma, thus rebooting the franchise so that Tatum becomes the new final girl that the horror genre needs. While Jessica gets distracted laying out her arguments for revamping the story, Mark carefully takes a pocket knife out of his pocket and slowly cuts the bindings on his daughter's ankles. Once free, Tatum violently headbutts Jessica to push her away, giving Sidney the perfect opportunity to grab a gun and blow Marco's head off with a single shot. Jessica runs away toward the garage under construction and turns on a radio at full volume to disorient them. Sidney follows her to turn it off, and Jessica lunges at her, tackling her. A fierce hand-to-hand fight breaks out where Sidney stabs Jessica in the leg using a screwdriver, while Jessica tries to strangle her using a wire. The close quarters allow Sidney to retrieve the screwdriver to stab her several times and get her off of her, at which point Tatum appears and shoots Jessica, knocking her down. The villain disappears briefly and returns to launch one last attack, prompting mother and daughter to act together and shoot her in the head about 20 times, annihilating her for good. Once the nightmare is over, police cars and paramedics arrive to cordon off the area around the house. Ambulances take Mark away to receive urgent medical treatment, and the authorities confirm that both Chad and Mindy survived their respective injuries at the bar. Sidney approaches Gale Weathers to apologize for her distance in New York, stating that she has always considered her a great friend, and they both seal their reconciliation with a tight hug. Immediately after, Sidney sits down to chat quietly with Tatum and reveals that she decided to name her that in honor of one of her best friends from her youth, who stood out for being an extremely brave and smart girl. They both share words of love, melt into a deeply emotional hug that leaves all the horror they lived through behind, and decide to leave together, heading to the hospital to be with Mark in his recovery.